Hello, welcome. My name is Rob, pretty familiar face to most of you, I think. This is my 5th Wisdom of Crowds, I think. So 5 years of Wisdom of Crowds. I'm from a company called e2e Assure, which is 10 years old next year. I've been doing cybersecurity since the 90s, nearly as long as AMAR. I'm going to talk to you today about high-performance SOC. So this is going to be a mildly technical presentation. No demos and no...
Hold on.
I can just shout louder if you want. AMAR.
No, up to you. Will you hold this?
So yeah, it's not going to be any product demos. We're going to talk about what we've been doing in our Security Operations Center, hopefully for the benefit of some of you that are in Security Operations. If you're not in Security Operations, you may be lost on some of this, but hopefully not. So those of you who don't know e2e Assure, I say nearly 10 years old now, operating out of the UK and Australia, where I've just come back from, so apologies, I'm a bit hoarse, but I got off a plane 36 hours ago. And we have our own SOC platform as well as our own analysts to deliver our service. We generally started off doing high-end, big SOC stuff, complicated stuff. The reason why I was in Australia was because we were defending the election. Our SOC platform was used by EC to defend the election. But it also goes all down to small-scale organisations. And we believe SOC is 24/7 with incident response and managed detection response. We like to do things properly where possible. And over the years, we've been trying to find ways to add value and be leaders in this space, and I'm going to provide some insight onto that. Now, there's loads of ways these days that a SOC should be helping organisations beyond just looking at alerts. So the SOCs that just look at alerts and bounce them back at the organisation, that's yesterday's SOC. Yeah, SOCs should be doing a lot more. You should be getting a lot more bang for your buck out of SOCs these days. And AMAR's wanted me to do some more technical stuff today and focus on honey nets as an area and automation. So there's loads of cool stuff on this board that a SOC should be doing. Haven't got time for this today. So I'm going to talk about automation in the SOC and where that's at, or where we're at with that, and honey nets as well, as a bit of an interesting topic. So let's talk about automation. So I'm going to talk about a specific bit of SOC automation, which is automating the analysis of alerts. Okay? Why do you do that? Well, in a SOC, your enemy is alerts. You've all heard of alert fatigue. With everyone moving remote, and just in general, the SOC gets more and more alerts. And that pisses people off. Analysts get bored, they get frustrated, they spend less time on the alerts. They do less quality investigations, you end up just closing mass alerts down. And there's not a lot of value in that process. And it's a challenge for every single SOC. It really is. So 2 years ago, we set ourselves a mission to deal with that. Okay, and go from 5% automation of alerts to over 90%. And I've got some stats which I'll show you. And we started by trying to automate Carl, because Carl was seen as one of our top analysts. So we called it the ACR system, the Automate Carl. But it's actually about auto-closing rules by having the computer process what the analyst does, the routine tasks. That's much better than simply tuning stuff out, okay? Because the SOC, what it can do, it just starts tuning stuff out. Okay, so it might take the EDR alert and go, well, I'll tell you what, I'm only going to look at critical EDR alerts. Well, half the stuff that's important comes through at info level. We all know that. We can't rely on the systems to do it. We need to look at every alert in the SOC. We can't just turn stuff off. That's not acceptable because you'll miss stuff. So this is about handling noisy alerts well. Here's a quick stat. This is the last year. The orange is the total alert volume in our SOC business per month. And you can see it's going all over the place. As you onboard new customers, even though we really try to onboard them with most of the alerts in a tidy position, constantly more and more alerts are coming in. You know, it's just rocket ships. More people use cloud remote systems, the more alerts you've got. People see a SOC as a big alert dumping ground. And they just got all these portals and they just say, oh, the SOC will deal with it. Everyone's familiar with that, aren't they? But the blue line is the ones that are actually handled by analysts. That kind of make sense? So I'm going to try and give you an example, and I've tried to pick out of about a dozen the most easy to explain one, but this is quite technical, so bear with. A lot of the time we're integrating with email systems, email security systems, that send in alerts saying, oh, I've seen a suspicious attachment, or I've deleted some attachments that have been delivered, or something like that. And the SOC is challenged with investigating whether someone's clicked that attachment or the attachment has not been blocked before the security system realized it was bad. Does that make sense? And that's often where we're operating in that window. So we're trying to work out who's clicked and downloaded that file. And you can code this up with software effectively. And this routine here, when the email alert from Mimecast or whatever, or the API integration with Office 365 comes in, we can extract the attachment name. Yeah? Or we can then search for it in an EDR, for example, by going to the EDR and saying, have you seen any files downloaded that look anything like this or have this file name? Okay, if it has found something, then we can get a hash from that usually and try and look for other things. And then we can try and work out if a user has clicked it. Okay, and again, that might rely on EDR or some sysmon logs or some other bits of data. And if they haven't, and we can't find it, we've gone back 30 days, then we can close it off and say, yeah, okay, no one's clicked that attachment. No analyst needed to look at that, right? Okay, quite a simple example, but you get the concept. That's really quite hard for an analyst to do manually at scale, and prone to errors as well. So if they have, so that's the grey bit. If it has been clicked, then we need to know what happened next. And an ACR will go off, and it'll go off and do the forensic collection that we want to get done. So our best analysts will get together, swarm this up and say, what data we want to investigate this type of thing. Process logs, network logs, all those types of things. And ACR these days will also start to run the agreed incident response playbooks with the customer. In this case, what we'll do is we'll try and find the file on the operating system via an EDR, and then we'll add it to the quarantine for the AV, say please quarantine this file, update the AV and tell it to rerun an AV scan. Okay, then the analyst is really watching this run instead of doing all this work, right? And we call it analyst guided. Amar.
Sorry, is the blue and orange, are they all automated?
It can all be automated, but this is where an analyst gets eyes on.
Right.
Because it's supervised, it's looking at things. And again, we're not talking about AI. This isn't some AI thing. This is just good security operations. Take your best analysts, take your top alerts and say, well, what is the best way to analyze this alert? Code it up. Every time that alert fires, it's then consistently analyzed in a quality way, isn't it? Consistent quality analysis. And then if it finds it can't be resolved as a false positive, it escalates to the humans. That's pretty much the only way to scale a SOC business. That's a good example. So this means you're not just turning stuff off, right? And this is what automation looks like in a SOC. And it also means that your analysts have got time to do the stuff that they want to do and you want them to do, like threat hunting, like vulnerability analysis, like threat intel work, like incident response planning and practice, like security testing, like using Simulate or something like that. Don't know where those guys are gone, but yeah, simulating attacks and practicing detections. That's the kind of thing a SOC should be doing these days. And they can't do it unless you found the time. Okay, and this is a key way that we do it. So if you can automate event analysis, then can you, alert analysis, can you automate things a bit more in a more advanced fashion? So we've talked about MITRE ATT&CK. Anyone here got a SOC and tried to monitor MITRE ATT&CK in a SOC? Anyone tried that? Yeah. What was it like?
Well, it's hard.
Hard.
Yeah.
Why was it hard?
Yeah, but
Noisy.
getting there. But
Yeah, noisy as hell. Yeah. Give you an example. The discovery part of MITRE is a set of commands like cmd.exe, ipconfig, netuse, stuff that everyone uses all the time. You go and create an alert for that, it's just pinging alerts everywhere. Yeah? So then you...
Use case mapping
Yep.
to the MITRE attack.
Yep.
And then you set your policies against it. And obviously you start.
Sure. Yes, this would be use case against the discovery section of MITRE, for example, or the initial access phase, the TTPs.
You won't go to the very end of the MITRE attack typically. But
Yeah.
the first few.
So this is going all the way down to the commands, okay? So we found that trying to monitor indicators, so basically if your SOC is looking at known threats, its signature's being matched, right? Isn't it? AV says this, so-and-so says this. To get beyond that, you use frameworks like MITRE. Problem with that is it creates carnage because there's all sorts of alerts being generated and it's really difficult to understand. So what we've done here is use the same automation but to chain things across the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which I'll try and explain. Here's Quantum. Everyone know Quantum ransomware? This is really a good example for SOC analysts as a use case. I think this is one that was in 2 hours, 50 minutes. It took from initial access to full compromise. But the interesting thing about Quantum, I don't think you can see that, this is 6:56, and the first thing that happened was an email was opened that had an attachment which downloaded an ISO file, because that evaded AV, because ISOs aren't scanned by AV because it thinks the CDs or something. It wasn't, it was a 4 meg ISO downloaded from somewhere. And then it ran run DLL32, which is a classic MITRE indicator. Okay? But if you monitor run DLL32, you'll get 1 million of alerts in a SOC because it's a standard thing, right? So you don't want to monitor for that because that would be too noisy. It then ran a set of discovery commands. Again, if you monitor for that alone, it's going to be really noisy. Yeah, but it is quite a good thing to do, by the way, but it is going to be really noisy. Then it created a scheduled task. That's interesting. Yeah, tried to hide it, but created one. And then it loaded command.exe and tried to inject some stuff into some processes. But again, easy to detect the stuff. Yeah, really easy to detect, but really noisy. Yeah, really noisy. And then it did some more discovery commands, AD find, and ran some zip stuff. And it goes on like this through the 2 and a bit hours until at the end it downloads its payload and runs it. Okay, so that's an attack chain. And if we convert that into MITRE, and I've done this to sort of explain it, then the initial access phase was a link file being clicked that downloaded an ISO. Then there was some discovery commands. Okay, get the idea? So this is sort of MITRE stuff, attack chain stuff. At the end of some CNC, then there was some ransomware. So what attack chain analysis does is it takes all of the commands and all of the detections in each of the MITRE classifications and updates that, but doesn't create an alert for that. Just goes, this is this part of it. This is discovery. This is CNC. Okay? And then it monitors that constantly in the background and goes, well, I've seen someone do some discovery, but actually it doesn't look like a known threat to me. I'm just going to remember that's happened. Yeah? And if an hour later there's some more discovery, it might go, that's a bit weird. If there's some initial access and ISO files loaded, it goes, this is silly. I'm going to raise this to an analyst. Straightforward concept, really, but really quite hard to do. And I don't see anyone else doing this in SOCs at the moment. Okay, now another way this can be used is when you have an alert firing, okay, that's a suspicious thing, and your analyst doesn't know what to do, you can run this analysis on the system, if that makes sense. Well, this was an ISO file being loaded. Well, okay, well that's there then. Can you please look for any of this stuff? Go and run the whole MITRE attack matrix discovery against this alert. It's more like having like, what's the word for it, Maltego or something. What's not Maltego? I can't remember what the name is for it, but the malware testing framework, I forgot what it's called. But basically, this is like a SOCs version of that, where you can basically take something you're not sure about and go, well, I'll tell you what, it is weird, but it's definitely not a threat because there's no other stuff related to it. Therefore, I'm quite confident it's not a threat. Does that kind of make sense? Sorry? No, it's, I think of it. It's the malware testing. So if you thought a box is infected, you'd run this on it to work out it's infected. This is quite a similar thing, but without doing that, just using SOC data. Because the problem with the SOC, it often doesn't have access to the endpoint. Again, works a lot better, by the way, if you've got an EDR. Yeah, so my best bit of advice if you've got a SOC, get an EDR. Yeah, a cloud-based one with an API that you can query. And make sure your SOC technology can talk to it, because it's your analyst's best friend. Okay, so that's, I guess, enough about that. But I guess it's a really great way of having the whole scope of MITRE detections in a way that doesn't create your biggest problem, which is alerts. Shed load of alerts that you can't really investigate. And again, catch the unknown threats. So someone asked me last time I did this, have you caught any unknown threats? I said, no, I haven't caught any unknown threats. I've caught loads of weird stuff, yeah, and I've verified things weren't bad. But generally, if you're going to catch an APT, that's quite high end, yeah, isn't it? So what you're really doing in a SOC, you're trying to validate that something isn't a bad thing. And this is a really good way of doing that. Yes, we will find an APT as yet unknown, I'm sure, but this is not generally what everyone's really worried about. Yeah, it's an analyst tool, and it's quite interesting. I'm going to move on to, well, what it looks like without that. I've kind of covered this. lots of alerts and too much human analysis. So another problem that SOCs have is knowledge transfer and shifts. Okay, and alerts and ticketing. You've all sort of had this problem, I'm sure, if you've got a SOC. But it's often reliant on the current shift's knowledge, stuff that happened in that shift. You can do a shift handover, but with that chain analysis, the computer is worrying about remembering. Yeah, and if something happens across the shift transfer window, you've got it covered because it'll just pop up an alert and say, look, this hasn't been handled. So we found this is a really good kind of sweeping exercise to make sure you've not missed some stuff.
This is especially challenging when you have an outsourced SOC or an,
Yeah.
or an on-board SOC or that hybrid model.
Yeah.
Is that stuff, that institutional knowledge,
Yeah.
the outsourced guys just don't
Don't
have
get it.
because they don't get exposure.
Yeah.
So this is music to my ears
Yeah.
when it comes to outsourced SOCs, because that's been a major drawback that I've found with operating.
So
Customer.
we prefer doing everything in hybrid as an extension of your team for that reason, because we don't like doing full outsourcing either. Because context is key, and it's really hard to get contacts. We need people in an organisation to speak to and work with on this stuff. If I go back a few slides, the biggest use case of chat chain analysis is to get the intel and the things that you're worried about into use cases. Yeah, basically run threat hunts based on what you want using a chat chain analysis. Because that makes you guys happy, because you've got the stuff, you're seeing the stuff that you're worried about, and you've got the stuff that the SOC's globally worried about, which often you often sometimes don't care too much about, if that makes sense.
And it's that latter that I'm overpaying for.
Yeah, you're overpaying for stuff you don't care about. That's 100% correct, yeah. Again, SOCs have to cover a lot of stuff, and that's a challenge for SOC businesses, outsourcers like ourselves, 100%. This helps a huge amount. Right, let's talk about honey nets. It's Amar's favourite topic. He wouldn't let me come in here and not talk about honey nets. Who's using honey nets in deception or wants to admit it? Great, I've got some educated people in the room. So I started doing this a while ago, and it turns out a SOC has already got a lot of cool stuff that helps with honey nets. Okay, and I'll try and explain. So when we're talking about honey nets and deception, there's loads of words used in the honey area. Honey services, honey systems, honey tokens, honey nets and things like that, and honey walls these days, honey tokens. But basically it's anything that presents itself as something which isn't really what it really is. It's a trap, a tripwire, something to find out something to, if you go to the honey net, then you've been attracted to it, you're probably not a great person. Yeah, it might go there by accident, but the idea is you're detecting stuff internally. Now, this is about internal honey nets, not external honey nets for threat research. It's about using honey nets in your SOC or your operation to detect things. Why would you do this? Why would you do this stuff? Why do you put things out in your network to detect stuff? Well, who's heard of assumed breach? Yeah, Microsoft bang about it all day, so I'm sure that Martin's getting through, but it's the fact that you think you're probably going to get compromised, or already have, or your insider's going to get compromised, or your third party's going to get compromised. Therefore, you have to assume that at some point you're going to get compromised. If you assume that, then the logic is that you'll put some tripwires internally to catch them. Because maybe you don't already know, maybe they're already there. Maybe it's your insider, maybe it's your employees doing weird stuff that's actually a threat. It's really hard to detect insider threat in a SOC business. Really hard. This is a really good way. Give you some examples in a minute of how that works. Now, why is a SOC a good place to do this? Well, if you've bothered to go and collect logs, do network traffic analysis, integrate with EDRs, then you've got one of the key ingredients for good, effective honey nets, which is effective security monitoring of the assets that are your honey net. You want to set a tripwire, so any network packet comes to that thing, it alerts the SOC, and it's recording that constantly. These things need to be heavily monitored to work, because you'll want to collect forensic data when anyone accesses a honey net, whether it's a document, an API key, or it's a fake server on your network. That's why SOCs do this really well. And combined with ACRs, you can script out all the data collection and all the playbooks when these things are accessed. Interaction in honey nets is the degree in which you want the thing that is a honey net to interact with the person that's attacking it. So for example, I've got some time, Amar. Amar's give me some time. So you can set up honey nets. It can be documents, or it could be a remote desktop server, or it could be a fake domain controller. Yeah, you could allow your user to try and log on to that and brute force the domain admin account. That would be a very interactive honeynet. Yeah, you might choose that's too risky. You might simply run a container with a listener on port 3389 to look for an RDP session. So that's your interaction, and that's all to do with your level of kind of risk appetite for how safe you think you can run these honeynets. Okay, but that's quite advanced, and I'd say the biggest success factors are putting documents in SharePoint, domain passwords.xls, admin passwords.xls, stupid stuff, mysalary.xls. Just put stuff out there and then have SOC rules that detect anyone accessing those documents. Because why would they? Yeah? Sorry.
There's an additional benefit for these as BAU, because some people go, I don't want to run a honeynet because I saw too MPT and too Ninja and all the rest of it. The other useful thing is that if you've got data discovery tools, if you've got internal scanners, if you've got stuff that that should be finding these things, then they're a really good way of making sure that you get a coverage and a completeness for your tools that are supposed to be in environments. They're not just useful for detecting bad guys with really good signal to noise ratio. They're also quite good at detecting the signal from stuff that you think should be checking everything out in your environment.
Can it find it? Yeah, definitely. So why is the SOC good at this? So you should be already monitoring the systems where you put these honey tokens or these honey files, right? And this is a really good way of validating that you are. Yeah, so it's a really good way of testing your SOC. There's a lot of stuff I can talk about SOC simulation testing as well, which is another whole area of this. But this forms part of that, because if you can put things out there that your SOC should be able to detect, and then have some things that interact with those things, then it makes it a really good feedback loop that you know things are working. Is that going to make sense? So you might put some honeynet docs that are always accessed, the main intranet page, just to check you can access it, just to keep the churn going so you know you've got visibility. Is everyone quite happy with that idea? Now I wanted to talk about different types of honeynets. I've got a little bit of time. So you can go and put these things into data centers as physical appliances, as little worlds of honeynets that look like databases. And you can copy your stuff and edit it and obfuscate it and make it look like a really interesting thing. Or you can just do some light touch stuff. And again, I think if you're going to build that kind of containerized honeynet system, that's great, but it's probably not got the ROI of some of the tokens. Yeah, admin accounts, default accounts, funny accounts, create some fake accounts on the boxes. Do you know what I mean? That can't actually do anything. People enumerate them, get an alert. Create some fake email accounts in Salesforce. So this is a really good use case for monitoring SaaS apps. Yeah, because all right, monitor my SaaS app. Salesforce is key to my business. Okay, so we'll do things like, okay, we'll monitor for like failed logins. We'll monitor for unusual logins out of country. We'll monitor for like bad VPN addresses accessing Salesforce. You know, people using Tor. Why are you using Tor to access Salesforce? There's got to be an attacker. But actually, a really good way of using it is putting some honey tokens, some fake accounts, some fake data in Salesforce that the Salesforce team won't normally use. And if anyone's got access to your Salesforce and they're grubbing around, they'll probably do something. Okay, does that make sense? So it works quite well for SaaS apps where you're wondering what exactly you can do to detect threats. And what people are worried about, we've got things like Salesforce, is someone stealing the data and downloading stuff. Create some fake data. And now you can take this further, which is to put tokens that you want to get exposed. I don't know if anyone's seen that kind of approach used, where you want stuff to be compromised to see where it goes. Don't advise doing that for your normal SOC operation, if you see what I'm saying.
It's helpful in where you can't get EDR, right? I'm sure everybody in this room has got some amount of technical depth in the organisation where you just can't get that agent on there.
Yeah.
And obviously you need to know when someone's touching those systems.
Exactly.
Traditional tool and you just can't get on there.
It's really easy to do this with little documents and files and stuff, with standard log monitoring. Really easy stuff to do. Some guides, some characteristics. So to do this correctly, it should be convincing. Yeah, so you want to make stuff reasonably convincing. And it's got to be easy to find as well, which people don't often get when they're doing this. Your normal attacker isn't that clever. It's got to be easily findable, whatever you're doing. It can't be tucked away deep somewhere. You can do that too, but you really want to make it quite easy, because otherwise it might not catch anything at all. And interactiveness I've discussed is key. You need to decide how much you want to interact with these things. but it's got to be safe and monitored. So you shouldn't be able to create something which could be then used to exploit your organisation. Makes sense? So listen, I wanted to just give you some...
Does someone need an operating mature SOC to
No.
to tickle?
No, to deploy honey nets, you can do it without a SOC.
Without a SOC.
Absolutely. If you've got some monitoring software that can monitor these things being accessed, then you can do it without a SOC. Yeah, it's not something that you need a SOC to do. You need security monitoring to do it. So you need to be able to do this. Yeah. So you need to be able to monitor every interaction with the thing. But that is not very technically difficult. This is easy. This technical difficulty of one chili. If you see what I'm saying. It really is. And I'm recommending that everyone does this in some way. If you've got a SOC, then I recommend the SOC do this because they've got 24/7 eyes on, and that's what you kind of want. And you're going to build a playbook, a response playbook that might be different for a honeynet because it might be the domain admin. It might be it might be anybody in your organisation. This is inside a threat is the main use case in my book. That's the main use case. But it's I tell you who hits this stuff: all your suppliers, all your IT suppliers, all your help desk people, rummaging around. That's the best use case. What is my suppliers doing on my network? Put some stuff out there and see what you find. And it might be a big eye opener, and it's cheap and easy. And you can do it yourself. Start by putting stuff into SharePoint on file systems. Make it discoverable. Make sure you can log though who can access it. You'll get quite a long way, in my opinion. We're exhibiting today, myself and Jim, who's head of R&D. If you've got any questions about SOC, please do talk to us. We'll tell you everything that we know, whether it's useful or not.